My name is Gary Simon, and I'm the AARP Hawaii Volunteer State President. On behalf of AARP Hawaii and our speakers, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Build a Disaster Plan for Surviving a Hurricane. This session is the second of 4 weekly webinars we are holding each Saturday in June to help you plan for a hurricane. Let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a picture of what you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen on a PC and possibly the top of the screen on an iPad. Everyone is currently on mute. If you want to submit a question or comment, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. I will be monitoring the questions and making sure they get asked. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments. We are not using the raise hand button. The chat feature can be used if you want to make a comment to everyone or to communicate a technical question to our volunteers. We recommend that you select speaker side-by-side view rather than gallery view for this presentation. Do this by clicking on the upper right part of your screen. Once you are in that view, you can change the size of the slides or of the speaker simply by clicking and dragging on the middle bar. Finally, we have added closed captioning to this presentation for those who have difficulty hearing. You can turn this off on your end by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button in the lower right side of your screen and clicking on Hide Subtitle. This is a look at what we'll be covering on each date. Last week, we covered how bad can it get? For those of you who are not familiar with AARP, we are a nonprofit social mission organization with a membership of 140,000 people in Hawaii. We want to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Because we live in an island state, part of that means helping people to plan ahead so that they can protect their homes, their families, and themselves in the event of a natural hazard like a hurricane. Hurricanes, thank goodness, don't happen every day or every year, but they have happened, sometimes leaving total devastation in their wake, like with Hurricane Iniki. Our ability to be resilient as a community and even our very lives may depend on our ability to plan for the worst so that we can come out on the other side. And that's what we'll be talking about today. We are fortunate to have 2 extremely knowledgeable speakers today. James Burke is an AARP Hawaii volunteer and focuses on AARP's livable communities efforts and disaster preparedness training. He served as Associate Director for Course Development and Delivery of the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, NDPTC. In this position, he was responsible for all aspects of course development and delivery of the NDPTC program. Earl Kealoha is a retired Honolulu fire captain. After retiring, he became an independent instructor with the NDPTC. Please, James and Earl, take it away.
Thank you, Gary. Welcome. Thank you for attending today's disaster preparedness workshop. My name is James Burke, and with me today is Captain Kealoha, Captain Earl, and this is the second in a series of webinars focused on hurricane disaster preparedness. Again, last week you learned more about hurricanes and the damage that can occur. Today, we're going to focus on the things that you could do or should be doing to prepare yourself to make sure that you're ready. Are you ready? Do you remember the types of hurricane hazards that were discussed last week? We'd like to do a poll. Do you remember the type of hurricane hazards that might threaten you? So let's go ahead and do a poll. Next slide.
So folks, you should see polling questions on your screen. Just click the option that you think most answers the question, which of these are hurricane hazards? Okay, we have a strong leaning. Almost everyone is saying all of them, 1, 2, and 3. James?
Oh, that's great. I mean, we got great answers. We got good people. I was actually waiting for it to be 83. So not everybody, I guess everybody's finished. So we're just going to go ahead and move on. Next slide. Are we going to share the results?
Just move on. It was almost 100%. There we go.
So by preparing ahead, you become an asset, not a liability during a disaster. It's important for you to plan ahead. That's what we're here for. Case in point, a national survey noted that in 2019, there were 3.29 firefighters, career or volunteer, per 1,000 inhabitants. And so if they have to carry all 100,000 people, that's going to be kind of hard. Okay, so don't try to become a hero, but make sure that you plan ahead. Keep people safe, limit property damage, know what to do during and after disaster, better manage your savings and support community preparedness, help your community get back up and running after the disaster. We encourage everyone to develop their own plan. Next slide. So please prepare your own plan, and we're going to be trying to help you with that as we move through this presentation. So a survey was conducted in 2019, and it was done by the Harris Poll, and you can see the results. 34% of people assembled disaster supplies, food, first aid, water, tools, and we're going to be talking about that. 32% of people created an evacuation plan, and we'll be talking about that in more detail. People backed up and stored personal information. That's kind of important. People forget that. One of the things that you can be doing to help yourself, like right now, today, as soon as we're done, just go out and take a picture of everything, and keep those pictures in a safe place. You evaluated your insurance needs. Sometimes we forget to do that. Please talk to your insurance agent, and make sure that you have the right coverage. Take the 26% taken an inventory of assets and possessions for insurance purposes. 24% contributed to an emergency savings account. 19% created or updated an estate plan and/or will. 19% purchased additional insurance, flood insurance, hurricane insurance, etc. 15% created a disaster plan to protect finances. 2% others, and 27% of the people says, I have not taken any steps to prepare for a natural disaster. Hopefully, that doesn't include people in this session. Next slide. How do you prepare for a disaster? 1, know your risks. So we talked about, or this series of webinars talked about the risks last week. And so the risks for a catastrophic hurricane are great. The risk for a minor hurricane are great. The risk for a really strong tropical storm is great. And so you need to know what are your risks based upon who you are and where you are. Secondly, make a plan. And make a plan for yourself and your family. And lastly, take actions. Remember, 32% of the people said that they made a plan, and 34% said those prepared a disaster kit. and 27% did nothing. And see, part of the problem is that you need to make a plan and then practice it. It doesn't really good to, I mean, some people have a fire evacuation plan. When was the last time you practiced? I know that in our family, we practice once a year, mainly because we have nerdy people who are worried about stuff like that. And so we practice our plan once a year. Next slide. So we're in hurricane season right now. Generally speaking, it's June to November, but you should be making your plans now while it's still, while we have beautiful weather and clear skies. It's called blue sky planning. Just do it now. Evacuation versus sheltering in place. That's stuff you should know this month while things are beautiful. Be familiar with your evacuation route. So if you live in an area where you're going to be required to evacuate, how are you going to leave? Are you going to walk? You're going to drive? Is someone going to pick you up? You need to be figuring those things out. Practice going to a safe location. If you are going to hunker down, you should be in a small interior, windowless room with a sturdy building on the lowest level, not subject to flooding. And so it needs to be sort of hardened shelter. We're going to be talking about that as a next week when we talk about making sure that your home is and where you live is strengthened. Next slide. So it says, big title, NOAA predicts a below normal 2022 Central Pacific hurricane season. But that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. This is not time to let your guard down, okay? Hurricanes are one thing. They're like the peak of the storm. I know many of us who live in Hawaii are very familiar with the tropical storms. If you remember the tropical storms a couple of years ago, they started as hurricanes. I bet you if you lived in Puna on the Big Island, you don't take tropical storms lightly. They could knock a bunch of stuff down and really wreak havoc with where you live. People who live in the coastal areas, whenever the waves get big, it doesn't take a hurricane to make waves big and then come and crash on the shore. And so you need to have a plan. You need to keep yourself secure. But let's just hope that it's just another. Let's hope for clear skies. Next slide, please. Hurricanes. Just want to let you know that we're going to have some additional handouts that we can make available to you at the end of the session to help you prepare your own disaster preparedness plan. So first, gather all the necessary supplies, each person's specific needs, including medications and pets. And what we mean is make a list. You don't have to gather them all right now. They're probably in that location where you want them to be right now to make your lives better. But you should know where they are. And if you need to take them, you can take them down, put them in a plate, put them in a bag or something. Keep important documents in a safe place. Password protected if you're going to be keeping it, if you have digital copies. If you have a digital copy, make a copy, put it on a thumb drive, mail that thumb drive, put it in your safe deposit box, put it someplace where it's going to be safe. Prepare your home from both high winds and possible flooding. Clear the drains. Pick up all those things that are lying around in your backyard that I know we all sometimes have a problem cleaning our backyards, but those things that are just lying around, they can become missiles and they can fly and hit something. Clearing the drains is a biggie. You'd be surprised how many drains get overrun. Those people who live in East Honolulu are very, very familiar with that, is when there's drainage canals that are cluttered. And well, actually anybody who lives near a stream or something like that, it's whenever the drainage streams get cluttered, it kind of backs up and makes things really, really messy. We don't like that. Consider hurricane shutters. If you live in an area where, well, we all do. I personally have hurricane shutters when a hurricane is coming. We'll talk about that more next week when we talk about preparing your home. Remove damaged tree limbs, or that's kind of important. It's helps keep your house clean, maybe keep your neighbors happy and yourself. And review your insurance policies. Next slide, please.
James, we have a question. Question is, I recently reviewed my hurricane plan and noticed that Waikele Elementary isn't on the list of available shelters I have. This school is newer than most other schools. Why is this?
So I'm not really sure. I would have to find out. But I do know that in general, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency is not in the business of they're trying to get people to shelter in place, and understand that the elementary schools are not necessarily designed as hurricane shelters. Can they withstand a 200-mile-an-hour wind? That's one of the key aspects. And there's other reasons. No, the Red Cross doesn't determine shelters. The Red Cross staffs the shelters, but we'll go and find out why Waikele Elementary can't be a shelter. I'm not really sure. So if you're told to evacuate,
Gary and James, the last resource that I looked at, it was the state HIEMA's website of refuge centers. And I think they would have more knowledge as to why Waikele is not on that list. Perhaps next week, like James said, it'll go into more detail. But I think for the short term right now, it would be good to go to the HIEMA website and also take a look at the website, because they have a listing of all of the refuge shelters within their state. So that's someplace to go right away. And then later, we'll reiterate again, you need to look for those that are pet friendly if you have pets too. So HIEMA to me would be the best link to go to get the answer to that question.
thanks, Earl. So if you're told to evacuate, do so immediately. Don't drive around barricades. And so that's probably, you know, I'm just going to guess that that's people who are living in the coastal areas, because that's where you're going to have a lot of, you have storm surge and you have storm surges, and you're going to be subject to immediate flooding. If you're trapped in the building due to flooding, go to the highest level. Don't climb into a closed attic. You could be trapped by the rising water. The other thing is purchase flood insurance. Standard policies do not cover flood insurance. You must have, there must be something in your insurance policy that actually covers flood. And in terms of, and they make a difference between water that comes from above and water that comes from below, meaning rising waters like a flood and rainwater. So you got to make sure that you're covered. Work with your insurance agent to make sure that you have the right coverage. So let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to ask you a question. Do you have a written disaster plan? Oops. It's another poll. Do you have a written disaster plan? Yes or no, please.
Wow, James, it looks like this group's a little bit unprepared. I'm gonna share those results.
Okay, well, you know, still, this is pretty good. You know, some of you have a written disaster preparedness plan, and hopefully we can help you make that a better plan. And if you don't have a written plan, we've got a couple of resources. We can send it out to you. One is called My Disaster Preparedness Plan, and another one is called My Emergency Supplies. Now, these have just a lot of blank lines in them because it's your plan. You want to go out and download one from ready.gov or HIEMA's website or Red Cross's website, go right ahead. But you need to write the plan to be for you and your family. The other thing is that after you finish putting your plan together, have a little chat. It's not hard. You can practice it. And you do what we call a tabletop. And you don't actually have to be sitting at a table, but you can be sitting in a group. You can be sitting in a group and discuss what's in your plan. Discuss with your family, your friends, who's part of the plan. Children, grandchildren, close friends and relatives. That's what you can do. I personally, when I go out to various locations, and I know Captain Kealoha does this, is that we just basically ask people that we're sitting around, we may be just sitting around having a nice meal or an adult beverage, and we'll just say, hey, how many of you guys have a disaster preparedness plan? It's kind of weird, but we do it because it's important. The more people have a plan, the better off we all are. Okay, so next slide.
Before we move on, I just want to mention to folks, if you have questions for James or Earl, you can put them in the Q&A. We're getting a lot of great information being shared on the chat, and that's terrific. But if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. But I will just ask, James, Virginia's asking who announces evacuation?
That's going to come from emergency management personnel. It may be on television, it may be online, it may be from a speaker that they're, in the old days, they would like drive around in their cars and announce it via speaker, bullhorn, I should say. But I think now we're a little bit more up to date with internet and communications. Obviously, the television will tell you to go to your radio and listen to your radio. So you should also know the plans and the local resources that are around you. Schools and daycare centers, emergency plans. And so we talked about, is that one school why isn't it a shelter? Well, it's also important to know what is that school's emergency plan, because their emergency plan may be to evacuate also. And so it doesn't do you any good if you're going to go there and they're gone. So make sure you are familiar with the school and daycare centers. Access Honolulu Department of Emergency Services website for more information. That's DEM, and also Hawaii Emergency Management Agency website for further information, and that's HIEMA. And I believe the HIEMA website got sent to you by Gary. Next slide. Make a family communications plan, and we're going to do a quick poll for this before we start. The communications poll. There you go. Do you have a family communications plan? That's great. It's great. 27% of the people who are polled so far have a communications plan, and the rest of you do not, but that's okay. We're going to fix that right now. You should have all your family members that are important to you, and hopefully all your family members are important to you, and contact information from people that are important to you. This is what I do for my family communications plan, is that whenever it's the siren day on the 1st of the month, and we're doing the test during the hurricane season, I text my children and the people that I live with. The people I live with them, but I text people and say, hey, this is a test. Just want to let you know that I'm safe. In the event of an emergency, this is how I'm going to contact you. That's what I do. If I had children that were in school, I would make sure that I was familiar with the school's emergency preparedness. I mean, we don't want bad things to be happening, and the school did one thing and we don't know what that is. And so that's part of the communications plan. You need to consider all the people that are important to you. Who can you help? Who can help you? Your neighbors, your friends. It's make it a point to practice. It's really easy to do that family communications plan, and just, I mean, if you have a cell phone, it's easy to send out a text message. This is just to let you know that I'm thinking about you. We're testing this to make sure that we can communicate during a disaster. If they don't live with you, if they do live with you, sit down and have that talk. Sit down. What are you going to do? How are you going to gather? Do you have the right information? Do you have the right supplies, and so forth? And with that, we're going to go to the next slide.
James, do you want to take questions now, or do you want to hold off to the end?
So I can actually only answer one of the questions right now. Is that what happens if the solved services go down, then what? Well, that's one of the reasons why you have to have a preparedness plan. If you're testing yourselves now, then you know what to do in the event the cell towers go down. That has happened in the past. We all know that. The cell towers operate on electricity, and they do have backup generators, but they don't last forever. So if you practice now, then you can say in your practicing, this is what we'll do in the event the cell towers don't work, or the cell isn't working. Okay, so that's why it's important to practice. That's why you do drills. You do fire drills. You should be doing fire drills at least once a month in your business or in your building. If you're and the point of that is not to discover where the fire exits are when there's a fire, is that you should know exactly what to do. So does each island's emergency management agency have an alert system residents can sign up for? I don't know about sign up. Do you know, Earl?
Sign up for what now? I'm sorry.
An alert system that you can sign up for.
Ooh, I'm sorry. I'm not too aware of that. I know there's some apps off of your phone, but personally, I'm not privy to that.
I know that you can. I know that you can opt out of emergency broadcasts, but I don't know that you can, if you have a cell phone. But I don't know that you can join one. So I'll have to go look for that.
Yeah,
But anyway,
sorry, not privy on that one.
No. I was just going to hand everything off to you, by the way. So the next, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to move on as we look for these answers. Make an evacuation and shelter plan. So I'm going to hand this off to Captain Kealoha.
Okay, thanks, James. As James mentioned earlier, there'll be more in-depth information on evacuation shelters and shelter plans next week. But so right now, I just want to breeze over real quickly and see if there are any questions that we can answer. I'm going to fly through these next slides. Basically, like James said earlier, right? It's our civil defense, our HIEMA, our city DEM who are going to decide whether or not we should evacuate. There's other factors that will be mentioned next week. So these are things we can also prepare ahead of time. One of the things I know James was chatting with me earlier, a lot of us might have homes that are older and not so good as far as hurricane construction. We might have a friend or relative that has a very nice house that we want to move to during a hurricane. But one thing James said to make sure is that we let them know that when a hurricane comes, we're coming to their house. So that's part of our planning process, making sure that those around us know where we're going to go if we are going to evacuate. If possible, we want to stay at home, but we have to make sure that doing so is not unsafe. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, what are we? This is slide 15. Once again, okay, sorry, where am I? Sorry, I just saw the one about fuel tanks. I know gas prices are extremely high, but we definitely want to have our fuel tanks full when a hurricane is approaching. And we also, like mentioned earlier, want to know our routes and alternate routes if the regular ones are blocked for some reason. Sorry, Jackie, next slide, thank you. Okay, leaving early enough, be alert for road hazards. Do not drive in a flooded area. There's that famous adage, turn around, don't drown, and yet people still want to try and go through flooded waters. It's been said that even water running as low as 6 inches can actually move a vehicle somewhere we don't want it to go. So all these things here, right? We want to make sure we know where we're going, plan for regular and alternate routes. Do not drive if it's flooded. Earlier, James mentioned don't go around barricades. They're probably there for a reason. Okay, thank you. Next slide. I kind of jumped on it earlier. Make sure your family members know what your intentions are before you do it. And if you are going to evacuate, all of this supplies that we're going to talk about later for your supply kit, you need to take them with you. Especially if you're going to go to one of the shelters are just going to be a place for you to seek refuge. They're not going to give you any of the supplies you need. So you need to take everything you need with you. Have a radio. We talk about a hand cranked radio, a NOAA specific radio. And again, if you're going to have pets with you, you need to have pet carriers for them. And you also need to have supplies for them, including water. And then you also need to go to those lists and look for pet accessible shelters. Next slide, please. Okay, James mentioned earlier, right? If you can, call, text, or email your contacts here and out of state to let them know your intentions. Lock up your home before you leave. It says here to try and unplug all of your electrical equipment except for your freezers and your refrigerators. Next slide, please. Okay, damage, if you need to do so, shut off your utilities. This again is something you need to do ahead of time. You need to learn how to do it. Know where these shutoffs are if you don't already. And then also leave a note. Don't leave it too conspicuously because bad guys might see it, but try to leave a note telling others where you're going. This was interesting again, sturdy clothing. You don't want to be running out with t-shirt and shorts or a bikini. Have some sturdy, rugged clothes, jeans, thick shirts. And then again, check in with your neighbors to see if some of them may also need to go with you as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm gonna turn this back to you, James.
Gather emergency supplies. So we talked about this, and one of the things that we have is my emergency supplies list that we'll be making available for you. This is just a suggestion. You can find a list anywhere. Go to ready.gov, go to the HIEMA page. Everybody has a list of supplies. But let's make sure that you know what you're getting your supplies for. If you're going to shelter in place, well, your house is your supply. Okay, so whatever's in your house, if you're sheltering in place. If you're going to go somewhere, you have to carry this. So now, the question of, well, how much supplies should I have? Well, the recommendation from FEMA, the national recommendation is 3 days, but we live in Hawaii, and so things take longer to get here. So the local recommendation is 14 days. And so, and I know that some people want to have a lot more supplies than that, but what's number one on this list and should be number one on everybody's list? Water. And remember, the recommendation is 1 gallon of water per person per day. And that water is not just for drinking, it's also for sanitation. So remember, your doctor, you're supposed to be drinking 8 glasses of water. That's the 8 glasses of water does not equal a gallon. And so the rest of that water is for cleaning and for keeping yourself clean. The second thing on that list is food. If you're going to have an emergency supply list and you are anticipating a electrical outage, that means that food has to be non-perishable. You can go to Costco, you can go to Sam's Club, you can go to Walmart, you can pretty much go online and you can get emergency provisions, as I think is what it's called. And you can buy these things. And what it mostly has is dried food. And remember, we're not talking about having a party with the food that you're holding on to, okay? This is called survival. You shouldn't be like some people, well, yeah, make sure you put a can of Spam in there. Says, well, okay, that's good and fine, but it's not 1 can of Spam per person. That should be feeding your entire family. And it could be cooked for, to last more than 1 meal. A NOAA radio is another thing that is, you can get those. I think the last time when I looked in Longs, it was like $35. And, I didn't see one the last time I was there. So, but I have one. So I'm not really worried about it. But anyway, make your own list. Take this as a start and make your own list. What's important to you? Everyone has their own medications that they need. If you have animals, small animals, meaning pets, dogs, cats, fish, turtles, whatever, hamsters, make sure that you're taking care of them too. I mean, people consider at least I do, I consider my pets family. And so I'm going to take care of them like the rest of my family. Sometimes they yell a little bit more than the rest of my family, but that's what dogs and cats do. Make sure you're taking care of your pets. If you have large farm animals, you have to make a plan just for that because you live on a farm. Glasses, make sure you have your glasses. The other thing is that, you can lose those candles. Candles are not a good thing. I mean, they're good and romantic and all that kind of other stuff, but in an emergency, you need a flashlight. My flashlight is right next to where I sleep, and there's another one right in the bathroom because, that's where it is. And so it's important to make sure that these flashlights have fresh batteries. Whether you've used them in the last year or not, take the batteries out, put in new ones. You need to have fresh batteries because you don't know how long that you've been using them. You'd be surprised. Cleaning supplies, all these things. Anyway, you should make your own disaster emergency kit. Okay, go ahead, Earl.
Oh, no. I was just answering some of the questions while you were chatting. Carry on.
Okay, so prepare critical documents. Household identification documents. So one of the reasons why we're talking about this is one of the reasons why I told you is go around taking pictures of everything is twofold. 1, insurance. 2 is if you are in a location that things might disappear, like your house, you need to know what was there and you need to know where it is. One of the issues that they found for example, in Louisiana and Katrina, they didn't even have documentation for those homes, and they're still sorting through it. And that was a long time ago. Financial and legal documents. We actually have 2 storage areas for ours. We have one in the storage locker, one of those buildings that, where you store all your extra junk because we all got too much junk. Medical information. Emergency, that's another critical document. Emergency and our hotline information. Keep copies of everything in a safe place that's waterproof. I actually think you should keep it off-site as well. I mean, unless you need it at home, which is great, consider a storage container, or consider another family's location, or consider a safe deposit box. And so Preparing your critical documents is simple as I would suggest putting it in an electronic form. A long time ago, electronic forms didn't matter. Now it's okay. So it's as long as you got a good camera, it should be fine. Next slide. Okay.
James, back on supplies, Rowena Adachi asks, do those dried emergency foods have to be rehydrated and warmed up?
Well, the answer to that is, if you are talking about dehydrated food like those, what do they call them? Meals ready to eat. And by the way, I've never eaten an MRE. They were called C rations when I ate them. Okay. Yes, they have to be rehydrated. However, it's also granola. So you can eat granola dry. Don't eat MREs dry. You're not going to like it. But yes, sometimes if it's the emergency rations in the packet, they have to be rehydrated, or the MREs, they should be rehydrated. But things like granola, I mean, so one of the communities on our island is the Mormon communities. I know what they do is they practice putting together prepared granola in old milk cartons, and they reseal them, and they last about a year. And so you can prepare them now, save them next, and then if you don't use it during the hurricane season, then start using it. You then start eating it. Then you'll be fine. Okay. Thanks. I hope I answered your question. Okay. So we're gonna hurricanes in Hawaii. So this was talked about a lot last week. Remember poll 1? So, and you guys did well. So high winds, storm surge, and heavy rainfall can cause flooding. And those of us, especially who live in East Honolulu, I think it was at 93 or is it 83? I don't know. It was a long time ago, where it flooded at the top of a valley. So everyone is subject to flood. Okay. You don't have to be next to a stream. You can get flooded from a water main break. And so that's be prepared, please. So next slide. What can you do today? This is from the Emergency Management Agency, Honolulu DEM. This is actually a photograph of their brochure. Okay. So you don't know where to ask? Just go to their website and says, these are things that you can do today. Know your specific hazards. You live in a flood zone or on a ridge line. Check your insurance. You can do that. It's easy. Yeah, I remember the Kalaniʻoliʻoli one. Build your 14-day disaster supply kit minimum. Oh, by the way, it's 14 days per person. Okay, so if you're in a household of, if you're in a household of 4, you should have 4 times the supplies for each individual. And get your house ready. And you're going to learn about that more next week. The other thing is that a gallon of water is about 8 pounds, around 8 pounds. If you're going to carry this, remember, if you go to a shelter or a place of refuge, you have to bring your own supplies. Okay, that's how it is in Hawaii. It's not like that in other places, but it is here. You must bring your own supplies. You must bring your own medications. You must bring your own sleeping bag and or cots. There's nothing in the shelter except a space. So are you going to carry 14 days of water? That's a lot. So yeah, it doesn't taste good. But anyway, I would highly recommend getting water purification devices and or things to help clean your water. You can, if you have a catchment system, I personally have a 500-gallon water tank in my yard because I can do that. And I still will filter that water if we're going to drink it. If it's going to be used for sanitation purposes, I'm probably cleaning it to make sure that it's, doesn't have debris in it. But some people have swimming pools. You're not going to drink that water, but you can still use it to wash and things like that. Okay, next slide.
James, Rosita asks, is there a need to purchase a generator? If so, what capacity?
If you have the answer is yes, if you have the ability, if you don't already have one in your house. If yes, what capacity? I'm not sure. That's a personal question. It should last as long as you need it. Remember, when you have a generator and you're operating off a generator power, it should be only on when you need it. So meaning it's not necessary when you're in a sunlit area like we are. You don't need to have your generator and lights on all the time. You should be keeping that generator on to keep your refrigeration and or cooking, so you can actually turn it off. Because remember, you also have to carry fuel. It's not just the generator. You need fuel for that. And please don't get, and it's fuel and the generator. So you have to store both of them. And the other thing is that generator has got to be outside, especially if it's driven by diesel or gasoline.
Okay. And Holly Sullivan asks, I didn't quite get the milk carton saving idea. Do you fill with water and freeze?
No. I'm sorry. You take a dried milk carton, one of those waxed milk cartons, and you dry it out, and then you fill it with granola or dried food, and it's actually granola, and then you seal it to make sure that it's airtight, and you can keep that, during the hurricane season. After the hurricane season, you can open it and then eat it. It's kind of like putting things in a Ziploc bag, except that it's a milk carton. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's go back to Captain Kaloa.
All righty. Okay. This is another slide from DEM. A lot of this we've kind of mentioned already. It's just there as a link, things that you should be considering when we get a notice that a hurricane is coming, things that we should be doing when the storm is hitting us. And then again, once we have been given the all clear, things that we can do once the storm has passed. I was looking at one of the question and answers that was submitted. This woman asked about living in a condo with large windows. I'm hoping that can be answered next week. But one of the things that we've always been told is that we should stay away from windows when a hurricane is hitting. You want to stay in an interior area that is safe from glass. And if possible, I mean, this would be kind of unreasonable perhaps in a condo, but if by chance you might consider trying to board it from the inside. But most of all, just stay indoors, away from windows, skylights, and glass doors. So that's something that sometimes is more easily said than doable. When the storm hits, right, close interior doors, take refuge. The thing that I learned when I took the NDPTC courses on hurricanes and cyclones, the eye of the hurricane, right, that's the center of the hurricane. When the eye approaches us, everything becomes calm. And a lot of us, if we're not educated, we're going to think that everything's safe and we can go out. But what we don't realize a lot of times is that that's the center of the hurricane. And on the other side, you're going to get the outer banks and all of the other bad stuff as it passes through. So we only go out once the radio stations, once our local emergency responders have told us that it's safe to do so. And one of the best ways is to have a radio, hopefully a NOAA radio with a hand crank, or batteries that are fresh, as James mentioned, and wait for the word that we can get out there again and start mopping up. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, I got this lovely photo here. Several years ago, I was able to purchase one of these water bobs. I have not had to use it as of yet, but I have it ready to go if I do. And as you can see by the photo, you would lay this out in your tub, fill it up with water, and you could actually store up to 100 gallons of fresh drinking water. So this would be one great alternative to buying 35 cases of Hawaiian water at Costco. Just one particular. If you've got 3 bathtubs, you could consider buying 3 of these and getting them ready. The highlight of this slide is like, it's hard if you haven't done anything yet, but the second bullet point kind of tells you prioritize what you're purchasing, right? Life-sustaining items first, which are food, water, and medications. Okay, next slide, Jackie. Okay, I think James made a little bit of mention to this earlier. Things that you want to consider storing, things that are not perishable. So the first bullet on the right side talks about high calorie items, peanut butter, low sodium canned meats. What I used to always share when I'm on mainland presentations is, in times of need, I'm going to my basics, which is Spam, corned beef, and Vienna sausage. If we're worrying about high blood pressure, I don't know, it's not the time. We're worrying about trying to survive for a minimum of 14 days. So those are the 3 meats that I'm going to have in my supply kit. You guys have to determine whether or not you want to get the low sodium or the regular sodium Spam. That's something each of you will need to determine. But what is it? Granola, as James mentioned, you have a lot of different types of nourishing bars. They got all the different brands. So, you know, it's each of you guys to determine what it is you want to store and what you feel like eating. Something I wanted to make mention. I was reading the information guidebook that came out from Hawaiian Electric. They even have a 5-day meal preparation suggested plan you might want to take a look at. I'm not a tuna guy, but they had canned tuna in there, which is another great item you could store in your 14-day kit. And the middle bullet point we mentioned earlier, if you are going to have to resort to going to a refuge area, make sure you bring your supplies with you. And the last slide at the bottom with the current COVID situation, things that we never had on our list before, hand sanitizer, face coverings, and all of that. Those things we now need to consider bringing as well. Okay, next slide, please.
Earl and James, Mary Lee says, disappointed about Hawaii's lack of effective shelters. What happened to the underground tunnels under Diamond Head in the late 1960s when as kids we're told we could go there in case of nuclear war? Any other underground mountain tunnels for us Oahu residents?
Well, none that I'm aware of. I live in the city, but I know there's Makua Caves. What we found out a few years ago, right? Just like you mentioned, a lot of the shelters that we called, well, what we called shelters, they are actually only able to withstand maybe minimal storm winds, maybe 50 to 60 miles an hour. So once it gets up into the hurricane level, which is 74 miles or higher, these facilities cannot adequately protect us. So that's why the term now being used is areas of refuge. And what they're saying now is these are areas for last resort. I think next week, again, you guys will get a lot of tips on how you can actually start to strengthen your own homes. I know for me, if a hurricane is coming, there's probably a 90% chance I'm staying at home, for better or for worse, because all my supplies are here. I can do all the things that we've suggested to prepare for the hurricane, and I'm going to have to take my chances. If I'm going to try and move everything that I have to a shelter, I think it's going to be a tougher thing to do. So my personal choice will be to stay at home no matter what and take my chances. So yeah, can't answer you correctly on the underground shelters. I don't think any of those would be adequate as well anyway. So thank you for that question.
Okay, you had already alluded to next week's and the following weeks, preparing your home. But the question is, who can evaluate homes and community for hazards and steps needed on properties? But again, I think that those are coming up in the next 2 weeks.
Yes, yes, definitely, Gary. More in detail next week.
Okay, and Sherry Orr asks, how do they get copies of the checklist sheets?
Yeah, there's a lot of links at the end of this PowerPoint. I know that Jackie will be able to send it out to you guys. So the links will take you to the sites where you can get the additional checklists. James, I think, has already shared his 2 checklists with Jackie as well, and she can send those out at the conclusion of today's presentation.
Yes, I'll send an email out. It'll be the same system people got their reminder from. Also, once I stop screen sharing, I can paste links in the chat for you.
Right on.
Okay, thank you.
This slide right now, I'm asking a question. We don't need to discuss it in any length, but I just want to take some time to have each of you guys answer the question to yourselves. What kind of special items would you be packing in your go bags and your disaster kit? So we don't need to discuss it now, but just something to kind of ponder and things to consider when you start to actually prepare your own written checklist of a 14-day supply kit. So thank you on that one. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're talking about water aspects. I believe James has mentioned a little bit before. First bullet, 1 gallon per person per day is the normal amount. This is for drinking. This is for drinking. So when you consider other things, like if you're going to have dishes and things that you're going to need to wash, you're going to need more water for that. If you're going to consider bathing and you want to sit down in a tub, you're going to have to take that water bulb out, and you're going to have additional water to take a shower and bath as well. So this 1 gallon per person, this is just minimal for your drinking needs only. As far as other things that you have to determine, children, nursing mothers, and older persons, especially if they're ill, they're going to need more water. We live in a more tropical climate, so maybe the 1 gallon is not enough. So these are things that we will need to consider.
Earl,
yes, ma'am.
Can you and James said kind of the opposite thing. So James said the 1 gallon was for everything, and you're saying it's only for drinking. So do you guys have a consensus on that?
Well, James and I can junk and pull. I see Clem Jung is out there. He's formerly with the city DEM, and I would welcome any comments from those out there as well. I believe, what is it normally? They say we should drink at least 8 ounce glasses a day. So, well, 8 times 8 is 64, so that's a half a gallon. So perhaps James is closer to it. We got the other half a gallon for our other needs. But if we're gonna look at those 2, 3, and 4 points, I kind of think a gallon a day just for drinking would be a little bit better to consider. Better more than less, James. What do you say?
So no, it's a gallon of water per person per day is the recommendation that's for all of your needs. The other thing is you have to consider is that drinking of 8 glasses of water a day is not necessarily water. Some people drink juice. Some people, and that actually counts towards that list. It doesn't include alcohol. Alcohol is a negative water. Okay, so you don't. So if you drink a bottle of beer, you got to drink a gallon of water. No, so alcohol is negative, but it's actually for all of your needs. It's an average. It's not.
Okay.
It's not just. It's not. It's not like I said. 8 cups at 8 ounces a day is 64. That's half a gallon. So the other half a gallon is for other stuff.
Is it true that you can put water in a plastic bottle in UV light, like outside for 48 hours and it will purify it?
No, that's not true. That actually makes it worse. That actually makes it worse. And so our recommendation is that unless you have water bottles that are specifically designed to be out in the sun, meaning no BHPs and no PSOFs or whatever they're called, PFS. Anyway, you don't want to store the bottled water that comes on the crates, that comes on the pallets. That is, if you notice, if you've ever picked up one of those bottles, those water bottles, they have a date on them. That means that water can expire. And so what I do is that I have water that's in containers, and if it's old water, for example, I will filter it if we're going to drink it. If it's not, or I will use that water in the containers for other things. Again, down on this list is make sure you have a way to purify your water and other things. Okay, so I know we both are passionate about water because the number one thing we need is air. And so we learned all about that during the pandemic, is you got to wear your mask and all that kind of other good stuff. But the number two thing that we need is water. You can actually survive. You don't survive as long without water. And I think someone says that when it's hot and humid, you may need more water. And you may need more water. That's correct. And remember, it's that you're not supposed to be drinking all 64 ounces at once. Try using a little bit. There you go. If you need more water, you need more water. But like I said, that 1 gallon per person per day is just a recommendation for in general. How long can you keep tap water before it turns bad? I'm not really sure, but I do know that over time it does go bad. And as you see on the slide, is that you can boil it, and then let it cool, but make sure you shake it because it doesn't have any air in it anymore, because it's not going to taste good. 16 drops of bleach per gallon, stir it up. And there's other things. You can go to various large stores, Hardware Hawaii, Home Depot. I don't know about Home Depot. There's an emergency supplies, a couple of emergency supply stores in town where you can actually get water purification, or you can use the Amazon if you want to. But you got to make sure that you've got all you got stuff that's tried and true, which is why I like going to stores. Anyway, go ahead, Earl. Sorry.
No. Thank you on that one. I guess I have to sit corrected, James. Thank you for that one on the 1 gallon. So we'll go with the consensus that 1 gallon is to satisfy all of your needs. But again, some of us may need more for each day, some less. And what is the worst thing? The worst thing that James said was that beer is bad water. After 4 o'clock in my book, beer is good water, but that's another topic. Okay, so managing water methods. There's methods you can use to treat the water before you drink it. So boiling, I think James already said it. Distillation is said to be the best of the 3 methods, but it's going to take you some time, and then you got to have some special equipment to do that. So the note that I made on my slide is, check online for that subject of purifying water. There's a multitude of ways you can do it. You can determine which one you want to use and be prepared. Okay. That's it on that. Thank you. Okay, we talked a little bit earlier about non-perishable dry foods. There's a whole plethora of foods you can put in there. You got the trail mix, you got beef jerky. There's a whole list of things. So, each of you needs to decide what it is you want to put in that kit. Is it something that you can survive on and be happy for 14 days minimum? A long shelf canned goods, make sure you're looking at the dates on them. Try to balance them with protein, vegetables, and low sugar. Those with medical conditions, you may want to look a little bit deeper into the dietary restriction of that food. Some of it is not good. That's it on that one. That's it on that one. We're good. Next slide. Okay. Earlier, someone had put in the chat, I know last week someone mentioned the fact that we should have 45 days of food on hand. And I think James might have mentioned it earlier. That's a whole lot of food and water to be lugging around, especially if you are planning to go to a shelter. So for here in Hawaii, the recommended number of days is 14. Nationally, it's even less. So we're looking at 14 as a minimum, and then everyone's checklist may be different. Someone talked about health plans and being able to expand on your prescriptions. Our suggestion is that you talk to your personal physicians to see if you can indeed, get more prescriptions so that in case you do need to evacuate for 14 days, you're set. Finally, here on this page, which you'll be able to get at the end, just some resources here. AARP has a wonderful link here. Emergency go bags, Hawaiian Electric, that's another great one. I would suggest you guys go to that link. And then also the Board of Water. They have a link that you can go to and get a preparedness flyer as well. Next slide, Jackie.
Question, is it 16 drops per gallon or 2 drops per gallon?
Oh, James, you know that one?
No, I do not. I'm actually looking. I thought it was 16, but I'm actually looking where it says 2. So.
Oh, thank you for that one.
I don't know where it says that. It's.
Yeah, that's a great one we can research and clarify a little bit later. This slide again, really briefly, right? If you're gonna do these supply kits, you need to consider your home, your workplace, and your car. You never know what's gonna be, where you're gonna be when the situation arises. So consider having these kits in all these different places, okay? I know a good friend, she's actually packed her kits in like plastic containers. Traditionally, you see the picture there where people will put it in a backpack. I think is Mr. Cummings going to be on next week, James?
The week after.
The week after. Mr. Cummings, he has an awesome display he brings up once in a while. He has about 2 or 3 backpacks that he has all of his supplies in. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You want to do it in a big tub. You want to put it in a couple of backpacks. You want to throw it in a used suitcase you don't use for traveling. Those are things to consider. But the bottom line is trying to make it as convenient as possible for you in the event you're going to be heading to a refuge. Okay. So that's it on that one. Next slide, please. Okay, we're emphasizing here, make sure that you have a NOAA radio, hand crank radio, solar powered radio. This is where you're going to be getting your emergency information when the hurricane is hitting us. Just a couple of stations I have down here at the bottom that I was able to find where you can get more specific translations in Japanese, Korean, and other Pacific Islander languages. Okay, next slide in conclusion. We briefly covered today some of the hazards that are common to Hawaii. We're emphasizing hurricanes for this particular lecture. Tsunamis can be another one we all know of, and flooding is one of the most prevalent natural disasters across the country. So that's something we also need to prepare for. And as the poll question showed you, one of the challenges that we will have when a hurricane hits is flooding. Okay, we're asking you guys to work on an emergency plan with your family, both a communications plan, and then also we want you to assemble disaster kits. As far as sheltering, there'll be more on that next week, but sheltering at home is preferred, but we also need to be prepared to evacuate as well. James, did you have any concluding comments?
Well, my 2 comments are this. Number 1 is make your own plan. Okay. make sure that it fits you and your family, and then have a conversation with the people who are important to you. If they all live in the same place, that's a lot easier to do. Sit down, have a conversation, share the plan. It doesn't do any good to have a plan and keep it to yourself. That makes no sense. It's not about stock investment. It's not about playing cards or something. You don't have to keep it close to yourself. Share your plan. And number two, and just as important as sharing your plan is practice. Practice. There are so many examples of people that were saved by just making sure that they practiced fire evacuation from buildings if they're burning or things like that. If you practice your plan, it's practicing a communications plan is easy. You can just make yourself a group and then text them. Okay, so when things work. And then if you think things are not going to work, make a plan for that so that you know, this is what I'm going to do. Your evacuation, this is what I'm going to do. Make sure that everybody knows where you're going so you don't have, so everybody knows where you're going. There's too many stories of people dying and people getting lost in floods, and people lost in floods and dying in the United States and dying and lost in floods worldwide because they didn't communicate what they were doing and they didn't understand what their loved ones were doing. So please, and don't forget your animals. Your animals are part of your loved ones, okay? So that's my 2 cents. Earl, back to you.
I'm done. Thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully a couple of these bullet points have gotten into you, and we appreciate your time and your patience. Thank you.
Just one more question. Where do you get MREs? Oh,
Costco. You can get them at Costco.
I saw the chat where they saying that you can eat them right out of the bag. It says, yeah, okay, you can eat them right out of the bag. It's not everybody. I mean, yeah, I'm sure it is. It's edible. But yeah, the other thing, and I noticed this, and I'm going to drop this in because of the discussion on water, is that understand that bleach deteriorates. Okay, so understand it too has an expiration date. So when you're buying your bleach, look at that expiration date. It doesn't last forever. It loses its strength over time. So, and make sure you don't buy, if you're going to use it for water purification and you're using bleach, please don't buy the perfumed bleach. You're not going to like it. Believe me. It's just get regular, good old generic bleach. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm glad. Hopefully people learn something. Hopefully you're going to go out and make your own disaster preparedness plan. I really implore you to do that. Make sure it's written. Make sure that you are sharing it with your family and friends, and make sure you practice. Sorry.
okay. Thank you to the crew. James Burke, Captain Earl Kealoha, and Jackie Bolin. We'd like to launch a poll here. Poll 4.
It's
the number of questions.
It's our evaluation poll.
So please complete the poll. And thank you for joining us today. We strongly encourage you to join us for the next 2 Saturdays. Prepare your home, and preparing your home is next week, and the following week will be tailored to those living in high rises. Again, please complete the poll, and everyone have a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. Thank you again to James.
Thank you, guys.
Earl and Jackie, and most of all, thank
Please
you to all of our
get yourself ready.
participants for attending today.